Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're calling in from. I've got today with me one of my normal guests and one of my favorite housemates, Ted Pattison, and one of the devs actually from the PCF team, longtime member of the Dynamics and PowerApps team. He's actually been helping me out, Greg Hurlman. So today, one of the more exciting topics that we've been having in quite a while, how do you actually go out and put custom visuals inside of PowerApps? And what we've done before is we've actually shown you how to do this, the code that Greg wrote, and he actually did most of the demos on how to put it in model-based. Today, we've got the next generation, what the team just released last week, how to do that with canvas-based. So I don't want to take too much more of your thunder away. I think I've already stole it all, Ted. But what else are we going to see today?
We're going to see how to create a brand new project, just how to get around in the command line in a very command line driven environment. We're going to see how we start adding the TypeScript and CSS, into a custom component. We're going to see a really neat trick just to push it into your PowerApps environment and be able to instantly add this component into your Canvas app. And then we'll, if we have enough time, we'll finally get around to how do we build, a true solution package that we want to be able to distribute. So that's what I have in mind.
Sounds good. Why don't we get into it and we'll see if there's any questions. Right now, there are no questions in the Q&A panel.
Okay, and it's me and Chuck, and we know how to answer some questions, but we also have Greg. Greg is on a train, so he's much better at typing right now than he is at speaking, but you have one of the product managers there on the line, so text-based questions, we'll get a very good response over the next hour. Just wanted to kind of put a plug for if you want some questions, maybe Chuck and I can answer it, but Greg might also answer it. And Chuck, as we go through, if Greg has a good answer, I don't think I'm going to see it because I'm going to be talking, but why don't you go ahead and chime in and just kind of let other people know as well.
Happy to do that.
So you'll be the voice of Greg.
So Shane Young wants to know, how did you get so amazingly good looking? I don't know if we need to answer that one question, but so Shane, I'm assuming that's Shane Young out there. Thank you for joining, guys.
Oh, no, that was, I think, Shane twittering himself. Okay, let's go ahead.
There is a mirror he doesn't like. That's right.
So what we're going to look at the beginning, we're just going to have a couple minutes to talk about the PowerApps Component Framework. What are its goals? What's the scope? We'll talk about setting up for PowerApps Component Framework development. Chuck, number one problem here, PCF is not an acronym, so we're always supposed to spell out PowerApps Component Framework. So forget I saw a PCF on the slide. Creating and debugging a PowerApps component project. We're going to be, also testing. So there's a really neat way that once you create this project and you've tested it in the local test harness, to push it, quickly into a testing environment. So everyone's got to see that trick. There's also a bunch of samples that the PowerApps Component Framework team has created. So I just want to also make everyone aware. I maybe open one or two of those and just kind of show you how to get started with those. Okay, so what is the PowerApps Component Framework? So it's something for true developers to start extending what we've been doing in PowerApps. Now, remember in PowerApps, we have these two sides. We have the Office crowd that's been very heavy into Canvas apps. And then we also have the crowd coming from Dynamics 365, which is far more invested in working with the Common Data Service and building model-driven apps. So which one is PCF for? It's for both of them. So what's happened is we had a first preview where there's support for model-driven apps. So basically, your component had to bind either to a field or a data set, and you can only use them with model-driven apps. And so now they've added support where I can create this component and add it to a Canvas app. So what they're trying to do is just kind of unify the model. So if you're creating for both at the same time, you can create one component. But, once again, the intention is to really stay away from having two different models for creating components, to try to unify into a single model as much as possible. Now, custom components can be packaged into a PowerApps solution. So everything that you're doing can be shipped, basically in a zip archive. That is the best practice for shipping something, for either Dynamics 365 or PowerApps. Now, to get started, hey, there's this little URL right here. Let's say that we go ahead and follow that. And so if you kind of want to start going out to the docs.microsoft.com, and then here's the URL, PowerApps Developer Component Framework. This has got a nice tutorial. I'm going to do something that's kind of similar to the tutorial, but I would certainly recommend going through and absorbing all the material that's here and all the material that's going to come into the site over the next year, because we know that there's a lot of things planned, and this is going to be the main place where Microsoft will document what you need to learn to get successful. Okay, now look at is the PowerApps Component Framework. It's something where I'm going to create components, which basically are things that we create in TypeScript. Certainly, there's also HTML and CSS involved, but the programming language you're going to work with is TypeScript. Now, if you have worked with either Power BI Custom Visuals and or the SharePoint framework, you've probably gone through the learning curve of beginning to work with Node.js and using some Node.js friendly tool such as Visual Studio Code. Now, if you haven't, and you're still kind of in Visual Studio land that some developers still are, it's going to be definitely worth your while if you want to get invested in this, to learn more about Node.js and learn more about working at the command line. There are things that the team has done to try to make it, project accessible to people using Visual Studio. But because of all the technologies that we're using, the smoothest path for you would be to bite the bullet and beginning working with Node.js and Visual Studio Code or some other IDE of your choosing. Now, we're going to start creating components in TypeScript. And when I create a component, it will inherit from a base class created in a Microsoft API. That might sound familiar. And I'm going to have lifecycle methods that I implement. And there's going to be things like context. And there's going to be host container divs that they're going to pass me as we initialize my component. So once again, if you've used some of these other frameworks, they're very similar. Now, what's kind of neat about the PowerApps Component Framework is we have APIs for doing things like formatting currency, formatting dates, getting information about the current user. And because PowerApps, really kind of sees the mobile device and the tablet as first-class citizens, there's lots of features that they're adding in. So your code written in TypeScript, can access the camera, take a picture, open up the microphone, send back the location of where the user is. Now, there's also going to be various UI elements. There's something called the Web API, which gives you access to data behind the entities of the Common Data Service. Okay, now for setting up, one of the things that if you've never used Node.js before, it's something that you install. You can install the latest version, which starts with a 10 these days. It's free and it installs on Windows. It installs on Mac. It installs on Unix-based operating systems, and you have to learn to get around from the command line. Now, Node.js has this thing which is called the Node Package Manager. So another thing that you have to get used to is calling npm commands, npm install, npm init. And so we'll see some of those along the way. If you've already kind of gotten up the learning curve, that's great. If not, just working with Node.js is going to be something that takes some time. Now, when you use Node.js, one of the philosophies behind this platform is use any operating system you want, use any integrated development environment you want. And I'd say you can use any one you want, except Visual Studio was created before Node.js got popular, and the two kind of fight to some degree. So while the team has created some type of projects, that you can use Visual Studio, using an IDE that's far more Node.js friendly is important. So Visual Studio Code is a great fit with Node.js style development. That's what I'm going to be using. That's what I recommend you would use. But people that use Node.js that use something other than Visual Studio Code, certainly you could use any IDE that you want, but I would just make sure that the IDE is particularly Node.js friendly. And there are many of those out there. Now, when we start working with Visual Studio Code, one of the things that we have to do is to basically execute command line instructions. And that's something we're going to kind of see during the demo. So Visual Studio Code has something called the terminal, which allows you to basically, give commands directly from inside of the project you're working on. Okay, now here's where things get specific to the PowerApps Component framework. We're going to install a new command line tool. So for instance, if you have worked with custom visuals with Power BI, you install tools and you have a command line utility called PBI Viz. So we're going to install a set of command line tools, and we're going to have a command line tool called pack, kind of like Pac-Man. But we're going to call pack, and sometimes it's a pack auth command, sometimes it's a pack PCF command, sometimes it's a pack solution command. So we're going to basically look and see how to kind of get up and running right now. So let's, without further delay, kind of create our new project. Now, I've already installed all the tools that I need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring up a command line. And this is just kind of a Node.js command line environment. And so we're going to go ahead and move over to a directory that I have, which is called projects. If I basically step back over here, okay, here is my projects folder. And so what I want to do is I want to create a new project. So we're going to start very simply, just by creating a new folder. Great. Now that I have created the new folder, we're going to then move into the folder. Now, once we have been able to move into the folder here, now what we're going to do is we're going to call a command line instruction. So let me go ahead and I've got a little cheater file right here. And the idea is you call PAC PCF, and we want a new project, so we're going to call the init command. Now, the namespace is just going to be, I'm going to use my company, Critical Path Training. Then there is the name of the new project or the new component. So let's say I call this one Rolling Dice. And then I have either template field or template dataset. And each one has kind of a mapping when you're working with the model-driven apps in the Entity Framework. And we could really use either one to create something, which is going to be for, in our case, a brand new component that we want to use, inside of a Canvas app. Okay, so let's go ahead and put this command in place, and we'll go ahead and run this right here. And what we could see, behind the scenes as this runs, that it just created this brand new project for me. Now, you can see because it says package.json, a flag should go off in your head saying that is a Node.js project. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to bring up Visual Studio Code. So there's a cool little trick of just saying code space dot, which says open up Visual Studio Code and open the current folder. And so now what we have is we have our project inside here. So for instance, if I take a look at the package.json file, kind of tells me what are the different dependencies, that we have inside there. And currently, there's just the types in Node and the PowerApps Component Framework. If I want to add another package such as jQuery or React, I add them just like I'd add them to a project that I was working with SharePoint Framework or Power BI custom visuals. I'll show you an example of adding jQuery in just a little bit. Now, what you'll see is that when they created the project or the component's name is Rolling Dice, and they create a Rolling Dice folder. And inside there's two things. There is the manifest that we're going to look at, and then there is the TypeScript implementation file, which has been named index.ts. Now, note that at first, you're going to getting kind of compilation errors. And that's because they do not run an npm install when we create the project. So let's go to the view menu. Let's go down to the terminal. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to do an npm install. Okay, and Shane, you want to do an npm I because it's cooler than npm install? Just MVP should not spell out the whole thing install. Okay, so now that we have that running inside here, it's going to bring down the different packages. It basically brings down the API that we need. And after we're done, we should kind of see, some other stuff disappear inside here. Okay, so let's say that I want to get up and going. So notice that we have a manifest inside here. And the manifest is going to define out of the box this property. Now, let's say that back here, I'm going to go back to the command line for a second, and we got to get used to running a couple commands. If I go once again to the package.json file, you can see that we define a build, a rebuild, and a start. Okay, the two I'm going to be using are build and start. And to run those, let's go ahead and close this down. What we're going to do is we're going to say npm run, and then what's the name of the menu of the command? It is the build command. So we'll go ahead and run that. Now, one of the interesting things that happens when you run the build command is it looks at this manifest, XML manifest. Okay, one comment is we're using XML instead of JavaScript object notation or JSON files. So it seems like if the team had got to make all the decisions today, they would have used JSON. But much of what we're doing here is basically a framework that's being migrated, for the last decade in basically Dynamics 365. So they've used XML, and we're going to continue to use XML there. Also, just as an aside, as we start building solution packages, because of the work going on over the past decade, there's a lot of dependencies on MS Build, which is more of a Visual Studio thing than a Node.js thing. Okay, but what happened is I just ran that build command, and under this thing, generated types. Let's go back here, and if I open it up and there's manifest types and we double click on that, you can see that my component has both input properties and output properties. Now, one of the things that I would like to do is to basically set the properties that I need. So I'm going to go back to my component manifest. And inside of my component manifest, let's get rid of some of these comments. In fact, I'm going to get rid of this property right here. And so notice that you have things like the namespace, the constructor, which is the class name. And then inside, I'm going to add two more properties. So my component is going to be something that rolls the dice. So it doesn't have input properties, it has output properties. So we have property die1, die2. What is the type? And we're basically going to use an integer, so none type whole. We have output inside there. Okay, and now let's go back here, and I'm going to go ahead and one more time, we're going to run that build command. Now, when we run the build command, it tries to build everything. And what we should now be able to do is kind of go back and kind of see, what got built inside here. And Ted had the problem where he forgot to hit save. Okay, so let's go back here and save. And now let's do that one more time. I'm going to come back here and build this. But what I want you to see is, as I make a particular change to this file inside here, we should be able to go back and look at the manifest types. And for some reason, it's not building inside there. Okay, let me go ahead and, okay, I saved the wrong file. One more time. I promise to get it right this time, Chuck. Let's go back there. And
hey, while you're saving that, Jonas you mentioned something in passing, the XRM toolbox as being a pretty cool tool for this. As me and Ted were playing with it for portals.
Well, the XRM toolbox is a really good tool for building portals.
Yeah.
And it's a good tool for doing the kind of things with a common data service that's hard to do because you'd have to write your own custom code. But I think it's a better fit for developing with portals and web templates than what we're doing here.
And that's what I put in the chat window. So Jonas, You're spot on. It's good for this. It's a must-have for that.
Okay, but look what I did here. I basically said I want two different properties, and I want them to be output properties, usage output. Using output is pretty new. It wasn't supported until recently, but what you can see here is that I have no input types. So many components you'd want to load the component into PowerApps, and you want the PowerApps maker to be able to configure input properties, and I just haven't used any. I'm just using two output. If you're new to TypeScript, if you ever see the question mark, that just means that is a optional thing that you have to put in. When you create an output, if you don't return that, it's not going to cause an error because we have the question mark inside there. Okay, now what we have is we have these input parameters. You kind of seen how they line up. Now let's go back and take a minute to look at this main file, which is basically the index.ts file. Now it turns out you don't need the constructors. They have some very helpful comments here that you should read. I'm going to go ahead and delete them and just basically kind of strip this down to, as much as we could strip it down to. And what we're going to see is that, there are 4 methods and 3 of them are required because they're part of a interface that we're implementing. So notice that when we have the class, that's my class, Rolling Dice, implements Component Framework standard control. And note also they're passing whatever inputs and outputs. So what's important to see is that you build your properties, whether they're input, output, or input, output, into the manifest. And then the build process generates TypeScript code. And now you can kind of see strongly typed input properties and output properties, here inside of your class. Okay, now let's go ahead and kind of move through some common things that we will do, such as we'll go to the top of our class and let's go ahead and add a couple private fields inside here. So first thing is you have this idea of context. Now you have a init method that's going to run exactly once when your component gets created. And then as things change, update view gets continually executed inside here. So init is where we're going to add that one-time code. And so one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to take our context, and notice that they hand you the context inside of init, but you have to kind of take it and store it so it's available at the class level. Next thing that we're going to do is that notice that they have context. They have something called notify output change that I'll get to in a little bit. They have something called state, which is basically a property bag that you could write into if you want to store your own properties that get persisted per user. And then finally, at the very end right here, they have the container. So that is the host container that they're sending you. So what I'm going to do is just to kind of really kind of drive home the fact that that's not my div. That's the div that was created before my component got instantiated. And this is the container that I will live inside. Okay, and I'm just going to take that and we'll take the container and assign it there. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's say that we just want to do something like a simple hello world. So now if we say this dot, and we have that host container, and what do I want to write to? Let's just write to the inner text. We'll say something like hello, and PCF is not an acronym. Okay, and so now that we've got that inside there and we want to test things, we're going to bring back the terminal window. Now also remember that when you're in Visual Studio and you basically hit the F5 key, it would save all your files. This doesn't save your files, so make sure that you're saving your files beforehand. If I go back over here, it's kind of complaining that there's some little problem with the TypeScript configuration file that was created. So I'm just going to kind of make a quick save there and save it. But now what we're going to do is we're going to run this other command. And the other command was let's get back to the terminal here. And we're going to run the npm run start. Okay, now npm run start also has an option which is watch at the end. Okay, for some reason my console got all screwy, so let me do that one more time. So up here, I'm basically doing npm run start. Now, one thing that the team added about a month ago was for you to be able to add watch as a parameter. And the idea is that if you then update different files, it will automatically rebuild. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this right here. So as I run this, what you're going to see is, hey, there's hello world. That's great. If I come back here and we kind of change that to, say something like hello Chuck, and then also since Chuck is one of those very curious guys, he's always doing things like console.log, and let me see that context. And so here, let's kind of just do something. So if I say context, and now we've got this, and I'm just going to do a Control S, so that's going to save. And after a second, it clicks in, automatically rebuilds this. If we go back here, here's a hello Chuck. If I now kind of come inside of the environment over here, and we go down to more tools, and Control Shift I, inside here, hey, there's the context inside there. And now one of the things that I could do is just kind of start looking at all the things that they've given me, inside the context. Okay, so now that we've gotten up and going, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of put together something that is going to, basically bring together a component here. So right under the top container, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a couple more different things. And what I'm going to do is I want to put together a component that we can use to kind of roll the dice. And then one more thing I'm going to do is at the very bottom, I've got a little utility class that I am going to add in because I have a whole bunch of images that I want to be able to share. So if I go under my class, and here I'm going to create another class, and it looks like I might need to put in one more thing there. Okay, so here I have a class, so I can basically quickly pull a couple different PNG files. Now, if I come back up top here, what you're going to see is that I want a button, so that's just an HTML button element. I'm going to use some different images. I have these image tags inside here. In fact, what I'm going to do, since I'm a little bit lazy and afraid of copying and pasting, I'm just going to kind of move over to a solution where I've kind of already built this out and kind of show you what that looks like. Okay, so let me go ahead and stop and close this down. And now that I've closed this, we're going to close that folder and just move over to this other project. Now, in our case right here, I've got the this particular project right here, and I have the exact same inputs. Now, another thing that I want to point out is that you can add a CSS file. So when you look at your manifest, that's where you define your properties and your data sets. But also under resources, you're always going to have an index.ts file, but you can also optionally put a CSS file in place. If you go through the tutorial that I pointed you to earlier, it kind of leads you to kind of creating it from scratch. But the idea here is that, you have your CSS, and as your CSS, evolves along with the code that's producing HTML, they're all packaged, inside the same solution. Now here, we're going to have a top container. So rather than using their div, I want to create my own top container, and we want to have an HTML button, and we're going to have two different HTML images. Now, another thing that we're going to hold on to is a reference to a function that's passed when they call init. There's something called notify output changed. So the idea is that you might be doing lots of things in your component, but you don't always want to call back to the host and say that something has been updated. So there is going to be a point where something changes and you want the host to know about it. So the idea is they pass you the notify output changed function, and you can kind of see that is a type for an anonymous function. And when you call that, they automatically call another method that you have, which is basically called get outputs. Now, just to kind of show, I don't want to spend too much time inside this code, but I have some code here in TypeScript to get a random value between 1 and 6. And then there are going to be two private fields in my component to basically store numbers between 1 and 6. Okay, here's some brain numbing code, but I also wanted to kind of have the effect of being able to wait for 3 seconds. And to kind of do that is definitely tricky. And so what I've done is I've kind of used the new TypeScript async support inside here. And I have this little handy method called delay that creates a promise. Anyway, the idea is when someone clicks this button, I want to kind of change the images to kind of show something spinning. I want to then wait for 3 seconds, but do it in such a way that you're not blocking the main thread of the browser. That would be pretty tacky. And then afterwards, we're going to get a new random dice value. And also we're going to call notify change so that the host component knows that basically the values have changed. Okay. And we're going to kind of see that's going to be kind of an event handler or a behavior formula when we finally get this to the other side. Now in a init, here's where I'm kind of doing a lot of this work. So in a init, we're doing things like if I want to create my top level div, I basically say document create element div. And then because we're holding on to that host container, I'm going to take my top level div at the very end of creating all the child divs and add it here. So now here's this kind of work just with TypeScript against the DOM, which is creating a top level div, creating a button, hooking up an event handler to the button, creating 2 new image controls. Okay, now let's go ahead and run this. So we come back here and we go ahead and we do an npm run start watch. And so what we have here, is something where this top thing is a button. If I go ahead and click on this, it spins for 3 seconds, and then it basically rolls the dice and it kind of gives me some new values. Now, one of the things I want to kind of show about this test environment is how big is my component going to be? What if someone only gave me, 200 pixels of space, or God forbid, if they only gave me like 120, is my component still going to look good? So here we have code in update view. So the idea is init only runs once, but update view will run every time the component, has its host container size changed. And so one of the things that I might want to do is kind of figure out what's the width, what's the height. And so I've got some simple math here, but the idea is, as my component gets bigger, and here I'm just going to, use one of the strengths of this development environment. Let's go ahead and see what it looks like at 200. Let's see what it looks like at 400. So we can go ahead and, test things inside there. Okay. Now you've seen that. Let's go ahead and move back to the slides and kind of review some of the things we just looked at. So developing a component with PCF means that you create a project using the tooling, you go into the component manifest, and you basically adjust the properties or data sets. You specify the resources, and note that the resources is always going to be the TS file, could also be a CSS file. It could also be a resource file that you've localized text into English and German and Dutch. Okay. Now, the component manifest you kind of saw includes the name and the namespace. It has the properties, and it defines the resource file. Okay. And then we basically created a class in TypeScript, and we kind of saw the main methods being init, that's your one-time component initialization. Update view is something where it keeps getting called just before it renders. And so that's a good place to do any type of UI work. You have get outputs. We haven't really seen that yet. We'll see that as we push our work into the PowerApps environment. And you have the destroy method, which you have to implement. But if you have nothing to destroy, nothing to clean up, you just kind of have it as an empty method inside there. Okay, and we went through the work of using the command to create a new project and start working with those files. Okay, so now the next thing that I want to do is talk about working with this inside of a PowerApps environment. So let's say that we go back and inside of the browser, let's say that I'm working with this PowerApps environment right here. Here's where I want to do my testing. So we're going to go to the admin center. Once I go to the admin center, and this is the new admin center, we're going to go to environments. We're going to look at the environment in question that I'm using. So if I go back over here, I'm using PCF Dev2. Remember, Chuck, PCF is not an acronym. Back here, it's now kind of found those. So let's go into Dev2, into settings. And then what I'm able to do is under security and privacy. Let's see, now I'm kind of wondering if I'm at the right place here. I've already set this, but I set it a couple days ago, so I'm trying to remember exactly where we go inside here. But basically, there's something where there is a switch. Okay, that's something that maybe, Chuck, you can get an answer from Greg. There is a place right here that I'm kind of forgetting where to go to, so that we can basically turn on a security feature that says allow this type of work inside here. Let's see if I come back up here, go to settings, environments. Okay. Oh, features and features. Here we go. So let me do that one more time. So basically go to your environment, go to settings, go to features, and what will not be turned on by default, but you must turn on, is the PowerApps Component Framework for Canvas apps. Okay, now
Greg says it's right here.
Okay, thank you, Chuck. That was very helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, now we've got the environment set up. So now what we need to do is kind of get the command line instructions from the PowerApp tooling to basically push a file in there that is our project. So the first thing we do is we run this pack auth create command. Now, if back here, inside of my project, I'm going to go ahead and stop the command line. And now that the command line is stopped, I want to kind of run a couple commands here so you can kind of see the pack auth. So if we do a pack and auth, and I say list, the idea is it's got a target environment. So another thing that you have to figure out is back here, you have to figure out, if I go to admin center, and once again, we're going to wait for environments to show up. When my environment shows up and I have this environmental URL, let's say that I right click on this and say copy link address, and then I kind of put that into Notepad. So basically we need this, because what's going to happen is we're going to run this command right here, pack auth create, and you pass your environment. And when you do that, you then get an interactive login, to basically put in credentials of someone who is either, an admin or someone with enough permissions to be able to push in solution packages. And once you've done that, then it gets to be really easy, because if I come back here, what we're going to do, if I back up far enough, I'm going to find this command, which is pack PCF push. And the idea is, let's not take time to build a full solution package, but let's create a quick solution package for my project in this one component. And so we'll go ahead and push. And what's going to happen is it's going to build a solution package on the fly, and it's going to automatically push it, into the solution management layer inside of my target environment. Okay, so you can see that it's now building the solution up to 14%. We'll root this on, go. Now, when this is all done, I should be able to go back, into that environment, and I should be able to see a solution package, that has been installed. I'm going to give this one more second until I see that the command line instruction has fully completed. And once that is the case, let's now kind of go back here into our environment. And so if I now get back here and we're in the correct environment. And now I go to solutions. And what we should see is that there's the PowerApps tools under, and there's my, my namespace inside there. So now we're in the home stretch. Let's go and create a new Canvas app. So here we'll create a Canvas app. And when I create the Canvas app, the one thing that I'm going to have to do ahead of time is to set an experimental feature to on. So I'll go ahead and create this tablet layout. It would work just fine, in phone layout as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the backstage. We're going to go to App Settings, Advanced Settings. We're going to go all the way down to the bottom, and we're going to turn on components. Okay, so you kind of saw earlier there was one switch at the environment level you had to throw, and then another switch, at the Canvas app level that you have to throw. Now that we've done that, let's go back here. Let's go to the Insert menu, and under Components, what do we want to do? We want to import a component. So when I say Import Component, well, they're the Canvas app things. So if I had built a component, what they're calling, I guess, Canvas components, where you kind of build them in the maker, you'd see those here. But for me, the PCF developer, what I'm going to do is going to be under Code Experimental. So now we're basically looking at different things that I have been pushing into my environment. And what we should see is, hey, there's that rolling dice. So let's go ahead and take this and go ahead and do the import. And it doesn't add it to your screen yet. It basically just adds it as now it is a available component inside your project. So let's go ahead and add rolling dice. Okay, and now, one of those things I wanted to show you is, can you create things that scale? I guess my background in Power BI custom visuals, you kind of had made me very aware of how much real estate are you going to be put in, and do you have to be put into a very specific width and height to look good, or can you adjust? So that's kind of one of the philosophies that goes into building components, is being able to fit in. Maybe you'll get 200 pixels in width, maybe you'll get 800. Okay, let's go ahead and rename this. So if I go ahead and rename this just to dice. So now I didn't have any input properties, and if I did, they'd show up here. Okay, but notice that there's this on change event handler, what we call a behavior property. So, let's say that every time something changes inside here, let's go ahead and create a collection. So we'll call collect, and inside of collect, we'll call this one roles. And what are we going to add inside there? And we'll basically say, well, what is going to be die one? And so now you can see that, my component has output properties. And now we'll say die two. And, once again, we'll basically, get into the dice component and pull this inside here. Okay. So now if someone goes ahead, and runs this right here, it's rolling and I get a new value. There's the first roll, there is the second roll inside here. Okay. But what you can see, if I go back here, is that when we, have this one particular function, sorry if I'm making you seasick, let me get to the function that I want to get to, which is on roll dice. What we're going to do is we're going to kind of set values. We're going to call notify output change. And the idea is when you call notify output change, it's going to fire that event. And also it's going to call get outputs. And you can basically add your output values inside here. So for over here, you can kind of see that, what this component, the component consumer is going to do is they're going to be able to look at the on change event anytime that changed. Now, just to add something quickly here, let's say that we add a gallery. And with my particular gallery, we'll switch that to just title. And then we'll go ahead and switch that over to look at the roles that we have inside here. Okay, and then we'll make this a little bit smaller. And we'll have a second button that now will kind of look at dice2. And if I can only get this in, there is dice2. Let's go ahead and kind of make this a little bit smaller. Okay, UI is not my specialty, as you can see, Chuck. But now, here's the case where, someone's using your component, and every time it starts running, it basically sends this event back, that someone can basically handle. And so, your component might be calling across the network, getting other data. Your component could be doing, anything that you want. But the idea is that you define it in terms of input properties, that this Canvas app has to push into your component, and output properties that they can get, back in the same way. Okay, so now that you've seen that inside here, let's go ahead and a couple more things I want to step through. One is that I want to kind of talk through, how we would actually, build a real solution package. So what I'm going to do for this here is, let's say that I have a solution package that we're going to build. And let me actually go back here. What I want to do is I want to get this link. And inside here, there is a tutorial where you can implement a sample component. So I really kind of encourage everyone to kind of move through this demo just to kind of get their sea legs at working with the different things that I've got here. And, here is adding a CSS file, working with the manifest. And what I want to do now is kind of go into this section right here where we actually want to package our component. Now, one thing that's a little bit, what was different for me is that I have my Node.js set up all down, but when we get into the packaging part, it requires MS Build, which is more of a Visual Studio thing. So what the team is going to recommend is that you work with the Visual Studio command prompt, because this is going to have the things that we need inside as far as having the MS Build tools, available within the path. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of move over here, see if we can kind of do this on the fly. And so if we now kind of look inside of our project, which is roll them dice, let's go back over here, into our project. And so I'm going to create a new folder, which is going to be called solution. And now we're going to kind of move, into that solution folder. And so now what we want to do is we want to run a command, which is basically going to build our solution. So back here, first thing we're going to do is we're going to say pack solution init. And, what is the developer name, the publisher name, so mine might be CPT. What is the developer prefix that they're going to put inside there. And so we'll go ahead and this will kind of build the first part of the solution. Okay, now the second piece that I need is to basically get the path, to where the code lives. And so here, if I look back to PCF, and roll them dice, and I have, this particular path. What we're now going to do is, give me 1 second as I copy this inside here, is that, back here, I'm going to go ahead and add that pack solution add reference. So when you create a new solution, it doesn't have references to any components, but now we've kind of put that in place right here. Okay, now going down a little bit before, they have you run two commands. The first one is msbuild t-restore. And so basically that is just going to kind of build, download whatever references we have inside here. Okay, and then the second is just to run msbuild. So now the final thing we're going to do is we're going to run an ms build inside here. And now it runs the build project for me. If I look back inside here, we kind of go into our solution, into the bin, into the bug, and there is my solution package. And the idea is that now I could come and test it out, by basically importing, that solution up into my project. Okay. I've just got one more thing I want to run through, Chuck, and then maybe we could kind of open things up and kind of take some of the questions that might have come in. But one of the things that I wanted to show was that if you go to that Microsoft documentation, they're going to point you to a bunch of different samples. And, these samples are really good. As a example, let's say I go to the linear input control project. So what you're going to do is you're going to open the project, and as long as you have, all the tooling set up, you should be able to do, once you bring up the terminal, a npm I, remember Shane, that's npm install. And then once you've done that, you should be able to do npm run start. Now, let's let this run for another second or two. And now that this has run, now npm run start, so without you doing any work, you should be able to open up these projects and run a couple commands, just to kind of get something up and running, in this test environment. So here's kind of the linear scroller where you're moving it back and forth, and you can kind of test things, what happens if we only have, 120 worth of width in the container, does the component look good? Yes or no? Now, I'm going to come back here. I'm going to stop what I was just doing. And what I want to do here, if I can get this thing to stop, is that I am going to switch over to one more project. So open folder, and the one that I want to look at is going to be the, I believe it's the data, no, it's the table grid. So let's go ahead and open that up. And once again, once this thing opens up, it's just going to be a matter of me doing a npm install and then npm run start. And now we've done the npm install. Great. Let's do the npm run start. And I wanted to kind of show you one more thing that they've recently added. If I go ahead, npm, not run start, but npm run start. Now let's go ahead and run this. And so now, you have one of the Microsoft samples that kind of show you how to build this component. But what if you don't like the data that they're using? So let's say that I have, my own sample data, so if I can create a CSV file, here's the one that, I might create, which is going to be contact information. Here's the one that, Shane would probably create, which has dogs in it. But the idea is I can now go here, select a file. And if I can now go through and basically take that sample data and add that inside here, what we should see, after I click apply, is that now we can kind of see, our own custom data without having to push into the PowerApps environment. Okay, so at this point, Chuck, I think I've kind of gone through all the different things that I wanted to show. A couple things to note is that there is a vibrant community of us up here at powerusers.microsoft.com, PowerApps community, and we have a new PowerApps Component Framework, basically a forum. So that's where we can have discussions and you can get good questions answered inside here. I guess just before I push back to you, Chuck, I should also, point out that I work for Critical Path Training, and if you're looking for kind of in-depth, hands-on training on PowerApps, Power BI, we definitely have training that is pushing the boundaries, going far beyond people reading slides, but people really know what they're doing. You can kind of help you through. And we have a 4-day Power BI developer course, but because of Greg and his team, I think now we really kind of have enough content to put together a 4-day professional developer Power Platform developer course, and hoping to get that up by the beginning of the year. Okay, so with that, Chuck, we got a couple minutes left. Do you have questions that we could go through?
We do. So there's actually been a question by Keith Watling wondering if you have a minute or two to show the import again. And then also, if you wanted to start the import or show where those import screens are, there's a question about, are there any native features in PCF that connect the CDS CRM API with the framework? And then Greg answered this from the train. So Greg, I hope you don't mind if I read it for you. There are hooks to get CDS information context when running in a model-driven app, but when in a Canvas app is expected to get that data from CDS or other connections are passed to the input properties on your component. So the answer is it depends, as in almost all software. So other than that, I think Greg has been answering these questions. Our buddy INK or AK from New Zealand was asking about examples using the HTML resource. Greg says that that's something they're working on. And then Fabrice is going out and saying, if I update the component, will this be updated for each app? And the answer is yes, it will be. So Todd, do you know what, or sorry, Ted, do you know what Keith was talking about for the import? Apparently you did an import.
Well, I think it might have been once. So let's see if he can type just to confirm, but is it about once you've created a project, how to make it show up in your Canvas app? Or how to do the actual import once you built the solution package?
I think it was the import once you built the solution package. If you could just show that screen, I think he's just missed the screen.
Well, I hadn't tested that yet. So I was kind of avoiding the demo because it might have blown up, but heck, we got 2 minutes left. It blows up, it blows up. Okay,
and you say, and it would have worked just fine in the call. No, that makes perfect sense.
Okay, so let's go back here. And one more time, let's make sure that if I can get back here to Power Apps, and maybe just for a good measure, we'll even go to a different environment, where I did install the, okay, so if we go back here to Summit Labs, that doesn't have a CDS. So let's go to this one right here. Let's go to Solution. And what you're going to see is that there are a couple rough edges to this. Why I'm getting these weird authentication messages right now, the URL does not supply. Okay. I'm getting some weird stuff here. Let me go ahead and close. In fact, maybe I'll just kind of close all the stuff I've been working on just to see if we can run this successfully. Okay, so what I would like to show, if I can in this last minute, is going to Power Apps. Okay, and now what environment are we in? And let's go to a different environment, which we're at. We'll go to the Solution Builder. We'll choose Import. And gosh, I don't know what's going on here. It's seems like, okay, maybe that was a little bit more successful. It's like trying to date women in high school. Failure is instant. Success takes a long time, for me at least. Maybe not for you, Shane. But let's go back and okay. So now we have choose file. So this UI, is getting some love to it. But there's a pretty big transition of taking everything that's been in Dynamics 365 and kind of moving it over. Okay, but now if we go back to roll them dice into our solution, down here to our solution file, and we load that in. Now it's coming back unmanaged. And once again, these are all preview tools, so there's going to be a lot more options. Okay, and so now we've kind of added that in. And so now probably we'd have to kind of go through the same process. But let's see if I kind of drill inside here. Can we kind of see and there, there is the, custom control that I built, and that last part was kind of building it the real way, by building a solution package. And I think what you'll see is that the tools we're going to use, as they kind of move beyond the preview period, into GA, are going to have a lot more options for managed versus unmanaged. And typically, I think everything you push in here to me seem like it should be managed, but then again, I'm really not certain of those, so I don't want to say that that's the ultimate answer.
Well, there you go. And Keith said perfect. That's exactly what he was looking for. So thank you very much. Ted, I want to thank you. Greg, I hope your train ride's been great. He's actually been answering questions like a monster. We knew he would.
Thank you, Greg.
For everybody that joined, I want to thank you guys. And I'm definitely going to be posting this to YouTube and actually see it in the gallery here shortly. And then for nobody who was interested, I actually got my Power Portals working. It was a same origin setting on the X-frame options. There you go. How's that for random minutia? Okay, thank you guys. Ted, back to you. Why don't you go ahead and close?
Okay. Once again, let me call out the Component Framework Forum. Here is the slide, so come visit us here. If you feel like coming and looking into some training at Critical Path Training, we'd love that. But other than that, thanks for spending the hour with us, and thank you, Greg, for your very fast typing.
All right. And Ted, if you want to stay on for a second, I'll actually catch up with you. I'll talk to you later, guys.
Thanks.